And welcome to our Library Through the Lens live webinar, part of our series of adult programs delivered differently. This evening, thanks to HarperCollins, we welcome best-selling, award-winning author Rachael Johns as she discusses her latest novel, Flying the Nest. Please feel free at any time during the presentation to type questions you have for Rachael into the Q&A or chat feed on your screen, and I'll ask these at the end of her conversation. Rachael is an English teacher by trade, a supermarket owner by day, a mum 24/7 and a writer by night. All of these ingredients make up one of the most successful romance writers in Australia, who has shown herself a force to be reckoned with, helping to bolster a new movement in Australian romance writing. Now sit back, grab a cuppa or a glass of wine, and please welcome Rachael.
Hi everyone, and thank you to Tracy for that lovely introduction, and to Marion, the City of Marion Libraries, for having me tonight. I feel like I've looked down the list of attendees. I just want to say hello to, there's quite a few familiar faces. So, and I think a lot of you are members of my online book club, which I do with Anthea Hodgson. So it's lovely to see a few of you popping in, and to hello to all the new people too. This is actually my last library/bookshop event for the year, and for my latest book, Flying the Nest. So I thought, even though it's only 4:30 in WA, I'm going to celebrate with you guys and enjoy this last event online. So thank you all for joining me. As I said, I hope you've all got a cup of coffee, tea, Milo, or some wine too, to keep you lubricated while I'm talking. So some of you may have heard me talk before. I apologise if I repeat myself or you hear something you've already heard, but I think a lot of people, when listening to writers talk, whether they're just readers themselves or whether you've got ambitions about being a writer or whether you do writing, a lot of people are interested in why someone is crazy enough to become a writer. And trust me, it's a crazy thing to do. Writers are all crazy. We're all a little, what's the word? Oh, not nasty, that's the wrong word, but I'll give you an example. So writers, we have weird conversations. I'm just gonna give you an example before I start. I have this program called Voxer, which I talk to many of my writing friends with. It's an online, so it's a mobile thing, but you voice message each other. So you can leave up to you quite long messages, but people can listen to it when it suits them. Anyway, a couple of years ago, I had just finished, I just submitted my book, Lost Without You. And I was down south, it was a summer school holidays. I was down south in Western Australia walking through a maze. It's a very busy place. And my kids had, we'd done the thing together, and then they'd all just gone dispersed and were doing their own thing. And so I just checked my email, and I had an email from my agent. Now, this is a little bit of a spoiler if you haven't read Fly in the Nest, wrong book, Lost Without You, and you want to, but she'd said, oh, I'm so sad that so-and-so dies. I won't tell you who, then it's not a complete, could you really have to kill them? And anyway, I voxed a friend of mine, and I'm walking through the maze, and I said, oh, it's so annoying. I killed him for a reason. And the people like around me, I just saw them all pause for a moment and go, oh my goodness, who is this crazy person? And it's true, writers were crazy. I think you have to be a little bit crazy to do this job. But there's also a lot of fun things of seeing someone, Michelle, laughing out loud. Yes, there's so many stories I could tell you of conversations between writers that should not be overheard by non-writers, because I'm sure, and the other thing people always say is our search history in, online. I mean, I don't write crime, but still I've looked up some really crazy, amazing things, or not, or scary things, or naughty things. And, if someone actually looked at our search history, I think they'd be shaking their heads if they didn't know what we did. Anyway, already I'm off on a tangent. So I became a writer basically at 17. When I left school, I decided I wanted to be a writer, which is a very strange thing, because I had never been a huge reader or writer all through high school. So some of you, I'm sure, were like me and obsessed with the Babysitters Club in the early to mid 90s. I read all the Babysitters Club books in probably about year 6, 7. Absolutely loved them. They're the first sort of book that I remember, finishing and being desperate to read the next one. First fangirl author is Anne M. Martin. I also remember wanting to be a Babysitters Club, wanting to start our own Babysitters Club with friends of mine, although all of us were very dismayed when we found out that most people that we knew didn't want 12-year-old girls looking after their babies. So our babysitters club didn't really, eventuate. And we're all jealous of Christy at the time having a phone in her room. Imagine if we'd known that in the future, you would all be having phones carried around. And as a teenager, that would be glued to you. Anyway, so I read all of them. My mum read to me the Enid Blyton's books when I was growing up. Big fan of Folk of the Faraway Tree. Mum also loved Beatrix Potter, so read those. There's Dr. Seuss, all the great books. I loved books and reading when I was young, really little. But then in high school, I kind of fell away from reading. And there was a few reasons for this. One, the books that they make you read in high school, and I hope it's changed a little bit. I should actually say, although it says I'm an English teacher by trade, that's literally it by trade. I haven't taught English. My son is 16 years old now, my oldest, and I haven't taught since he was born. And I didn't teach for very long beforehand because I was crazy, and I'll tell you why later. Anyway, and I also should say I don't own a supermarket anymore. That bio is obviously a little bit out of date. I apologise. So now I'm no longer owning a supermarket in the country, but I'm back in Perth and writing full time. Anyway, I shouldn't have gone off on that tangent. So yeah, the reason I didn't really read much in high school was because the books were not the type of books that you're, but they're accessible to most adults, never mind children. And that's one of the reasons I think I really wanted to become an English teacher, to try and promote books and reading, because I'd found it by then, to young adults, and to show them that it can be fun, it can be really enjoyable, it can be escapism, it doesn't have to be hard and boring. I did read one book in high school English, and that was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, for some really bizarre reason, because that's not necessarily an accessible book either. But for anyone who has read Great Expectations by Charles, you might know of the character, or if you've seen the movie or a televised series, you might know of the character Miss Havisham. I always ask, if I'm actually in an event now, who has read Great Expectations and who knows who Miss Havisham is. And I'm kind of happy when most people say they don't know, because I've got such a terrible memory and I'm really scared that maybe I'll be remembering it wrong. But Miss Havisham was a character who was jilted on her wedding day and spent the rest of her life wearing her wedding dress. And I think I just, as a young, hormonal, dramatic, emotional teenage girl, just was so taken by this such tragic romantic image. So I like that story because of Miss Havisham. But apart from that, I actually got through high school English. I did really well. Only reading, does anyone remember those York Notes books? Sorry, I don't know why I'm doing this because you can't really see the size I'm doing, but they're about A5. They were called York's Notes or Cliff Notes. And basically they told you everything you needed to know about a book. They told you, sorry, I'm just moving around a bit here. Maybe I've got a sore back. They told you the themes, the characters, the plot. And they even had like sample essay questions and things like that. So why the hell did I need to read a book when I could just read the tiny version that York Notes told me? So that's miraculously how I got through high school English. I'm hoping my kids can't hear me because I'm sure it's all on the internet now. We don't have York Notes, but you still don't need to read books, which is sad, sad, sad. Read the books. Anyway, that's one of my biggest regrets, that I didn't read much in high school. But the other reason that I didn't read, apart from the fact that the books weren't that accessible to me, was because I was obsessed with something else. Sorry, I should tell you what that something else was. Boys, or rather one boy, because more than one boys makes me sound like a hussy. Promise you that wasn't the case. I was more a stalker. So basically, I'm so glad that Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all that stuff wasn't available, because I shudder to think what I would have put on. But basically from the beginning of year 8, high school started year 8 over here then, to beginning of year 12, I was obsessed with this boy, obsessed to the point that I would, like, as I said, follow him around the school. My friends and I had to like eat lunch near the basketball court because that's where he was hanging out, and I'd write his name all over my files and diary and absolutely everything. Everyone in the school knew I was in love with him. I even put letters in his bag. I was so embarrassing, to the point, and I harassed his poor younger sister when she came to high school, telling her that, I'm going to be related to her one day. No wonder he ran in the opposite direction every time he saw me coming. But miracles do happen. And in year 12, beginning of year 12, after 4 years of getting nowhere, but I'm a very persistent person, and I think it helped me back then, and it's definitely helped me in my writing. So after 4 years of getting nowhere, a miracle happened, and my beloved asked me to our high school ball, year 12 ball. Now, I think he only did this in hindsight because he knew I would definitely say yes, And as a 17-year-old boy, you know, it's daunting putting yourself out there and asking someone. But he also knew that nobody else would dare say yes because I would kill them. And it's true. I would have. Anyway, we actually got, you know, he thought maybe she's not as crazy as all that. He was wrong. I am. And we went out, I'm using this term very loosely. We went out for 5 months of year 12 in there. The ball was, and we started getting along. We got along really well. I thought he was the love of my life. We were going to get married, have babies, live happily ever after. But I was, as I said, a dramatic, emotional teenage girl. And towards the end of year 12, something happened one day and we had a little bit of a misunderstanding, argument, however you want to put it. It was very mild. But I said, you know, Garth, oh, I've told you his name. I don't think I usually do that. Anyway, I said, you know, I don't think this is working out, hoping that he'd say, no, Rachel, you're the love of my life. Don't leave me. But he said, yeah, I think you're right. So I accidentally dumped the love of my life. And I was totally heartbroken, as only, you know, 17-year-old girls can be. Went through so many tissues. Not sure how I managed to do my TE exams, which is what they were called then. But somehow I did. And then the summer holidays, when everyone else, all my friends were either getting casual jobs or going to the beach, partying, shopping, all the things, you know, you're supposed to do when you finish school. When they were all doing that, I was still mourning. And for some bizarre reason, I decided to write a book about me and this boy. And as I said, I'd never been a big writer or reader in high school, so I don't know why I did this. But I sat down at my computer and I wrote 80,000 words of absolute rubbish. Now, since becoming a writer, I have noticed there's kind of two types of writers. In those that came to write or wanted to write a book from the time they could read, from the first time anyone, you know, sat them on their lap and read to them, from the time they could hold a pen in their hand, they wanted to write books. There's those type. And then there's my type, which is those who came to writing through therapy. Now, I can laugh about it now, but it was very serious at the time. And I've met a number of writers since who have started writing because something tragic or upsetting has happened in their life and they've kind of just put pen to paper to try and deal with it and work it out. And that's what I did. And I caught the bug. Writing is definitely a bug. It's like a disease that's incurable. Once you've started, it's very hard to stop. What I really loved was the fact that I could play God. I could create these characters. I could make them do what I wanted to do. And that just wasn't happening in real life. I could rewrite the ending. Oh, I did rewrite the ending though. So the story was me and this boy. It was so boring. Even though we were based on real life people, they were cardboard cutters. There was no real plot. It was basically everything he'd ever said to me. And that was most of the time running the other direction. And then the few months that we got together, also boring, I'm sure. But even then I knew you can't end a book by accidentally dumping someone. So I gave him a horrific disease and I killed him off. And that's where the therapy comes in. I could mourn him. Nobody else could ever have him. It was fantastic. So then I decided I'd always wanted to be a primary school teacher. And I was due to start primary school teaching the week after I finished this amazing book. Well, I thought it was amazing back then. I tell you, it was not amazing at all. And I'm so glad that self-publishing wasn't around then. It's now a very viable option. I've got lots of good friends who self-publish for various reasons. But if it had been around then, I would have published this book and possibly you could have read it. And you would never have read anything I wrote again. Anyway, but I said to my mum the week before I was due to start primary school teaching, you know what? I don't think I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a famous writer. And credit to her, she didn't say, oh my goodness, Rachel, don't be ridiculous, which I wish she had kind of. Not because I don't want to be a writer, I do, but because the next 4 years were pretty much a waste of time. So I transferred to a writing degree, and this was over 20 years ago. And the writing degrees were quite a new thing in Australia. And mine was dismal. Basically, here's an example of one of the units we did and how they marked it. So we had to keep a scrapbook or a file, and we had to cut out newspapers, magazines, anything to do with writers, publishing, books, libraries, anything, and stick it in the file. It felt like we'd gone back to kindergarten. And we got really good at doing this without even reading anything, just, shoving it in there and keeping talking while we're at the cafeteria cutting magazines. And the person who had the biggest file at the end of the semester got the high distinction. I'm not kidding. This is true. And so on. Anyway, they didn't teach me anything at uni that I think you should need to know about writing a book. We read there was also English units, which I really liked. So we did a big study on Jane Austen for a semester. Loved that. This is where I found reading. because you can't be a writer, I should say. You cannot be a writer. It's a pretty bold statement, but I think it's true. You can't be a writer without being a reader for a number of reasons. You learn through reading, but also if you're not passionate about reading, how can you be passionate about writing? And it will come across in the book. So yeah, I was really behind in my degree because I hadn't been reading a lot. And so that was one of the reasons probably why it wasn't that great, because I came in behind. So I started reading then. The problem was I was reading books like Bridget Jones' Diary, books by Marianne Keyes, Kathy Kelly, our own lovely Monica McInerney, and loving those type of books. I'm not sure if those particular, if it was Monica, I don't know if she was published then, but those type of books, and some great British chick lit authors. I was loving those books. The problem with doing a literary writing degree at uni is they didn't want me to write those kind of books. They wanted me to write something that might win the Booker Prize or the Pulitzer Prize, or poetry. Poetry was fine. Unfortunately, I suck at poetry. So for the time I was at uni, as well as not learning anything about actually writing a book, like with sort of the structure of novels, what you need to do to make characters believable, things like giving them a backstory, giving something terrible that's happened to them, making sure they have a goal that they're working towards throughout the book, whether it's a little, an area very emotional type goal, or not area for I mean, whether it's emotional when you can't see, or a physical, quite concrete goal. You need these sorts of things. They didn't teach us any of this stuff at uni. I've gone off on a tangent again. I've forgotten what I was going to say about uni. Anyway, it's okay. So what happened, I did this degree and that's right. So they wanted to write literary fiction. And I think another thing that writers are often told is that you should write what you know. And I don't think that's true necessarily, because if I only wrote what I know, it would be pretty damn boring because I don't know much. But I think you should write what you want to know. I've written a number of books where there's an issue or a topic that has fascinated me, that I've stumbled across an article or something. That's what happened with this latest book. And with my book, The Greatest Gift, I met someone who was an egg donor, and I wanted to explore these issues and sort of learn about them myself and work out how I felt about them. So I don't think you need to necessarily write what you know. I'd say write what you want to know and write what you love. So the want to know is the topic. The what you love is the type of kind of book you want to write. And so, yeah, but I wasn't doing that because I thought I should be writing literary fiction that could win the Booker Prize. And so, yeah, it just wasn't, I was going nowhere. So I'm a slow learner. And I did an honours degree in writing, even though the first degree was terrible. I almost failed the honours degree. There's a funny story there, but I don't know if we'll have enough time, so I won't tell you that. But if we do have time and anyone wants to hear the funny story about my honours degree and my failing, then put it in the Q&A. Anyway, so I finished, and the problem with doing sort of a writing degree like mine is that when you finish, there's no sort of job that you go into. Like if I did primary school teaching, it would be a lot easier to actually get a job. But I am pretty proud of the fact that I did get a job in writing out of uni. When you ring a company and you're put on hold and you have to listen to those messages, that's what I wrote. And it wasn't that bad. It was fun. We had to write quite humorous ones, but the pay was terrible. So when I met my husband, I decided to go back and work at Coles, where I was working throughout uni, and so we could buy a house and raise money to get married and all that kind of stuff. And while I did that as well, I also decided, hey, I'm going to go back and do a teaching degree so I actually can get a job that has some sort of prospects. Because I'd done a 4-year English degree by this stage, I became an English teacher. And I should say, I only worked for 6 months, I mentioned earlier. The reason being is because although I like teaching and I was passionate about the subject, I still didn't give up the dream of actually writing a book myself. And being an English teacher, there's very little time for yourself to write because all the weekends and nights, you have to mark essay after essay after essay. So I was like, this is not going well. How am I ever going to have a chance to write my own book? And then I had a brilliant idea. I'll have a baby. It will sleep all day. I can go on maternity leave and voila, I'll finally get to write my book. Unfortunately, I had a really terrible sleeper. And then with lack of sleep, I decided to have another one. So we moved to the country at this time as well. We were in Perth when I met my husband, and then when I was on maternity leave, we moved to a small town of Kojonup, which is southwest of WA. Anyway, all the time though, while I was pregnant, then having the baby, moving south, getting married, I still really wanted to write a book. And I used to meet my friend from uni every couple of months, and we used to lament about how terrible it was. We were never going to get published. So depressing. And then one of us remembered an article that we'd cut out. Remember in that unit? That was actually the most important unit I ever did. And it was about Mills and Boon books, and how apparently there was a number of writers in Australia writing for Mills and Boon, and how you could make an absolute packet. And we suddenly thought, why are we trying to write the Booker Prize when we can just write a romance? I mean, how hard can that be? Everyone knows it's just a formula. You just, churn them out. And I'm saying all that tongue in cheek because I learnt it's not the case. I had a view that a lot of people have about Mills and Boon books. I had never read them. Since then, I've met lots of authors who write for Mills and Boon, and after many, many years, I also got a couple of books published for Mills and Boon, but it wasn't the first thing I got published. And I learned that I've changed my views about Mills and Boon. I had the same view, though, that a lot of people have, and that is that Mills and Boons are just trash. It's heaving bosoms and throbbing manhoods. My mother-in-law used to read them on the couch at Christmas, and I remember watching her thinking, can't believe you're reading that trash. Well, here I am reading Bridget Jones' Diary, so much more highbrow. But anyway, I wasn't going to let my misconceptions stop me. So I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a Mills and Boon. My friend and I challenged each other to do this. She wrote one chapter and gave up, and now she works in publishing. So she did stay in that sort of realm. And I read 50 Mills and Boon books as research and absolutely fell in love with it. I should say I was working in a small town library at the time. So I worked one morning a week at the Kojant Library. So I was lucky because I had a lot of access to Mills and Boon books. And if anyone lives in a small town, one of the first things I learned about living in small towns, and this helped with my writing definitely, was that everyone knows everything about everyone else, sometimes before you know, and sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. And so I knew that if I got books out in the library, everyone would see. So I waited until no one was there, and then I snuck them out. And I read 50 Mills and books in a month when I was pregnant with my second child. They are small books. You can see an example here. So that's my latest, mainstream fiction book, and that's Mills and Boon. So they're small books. If anyone's read Mills and Boon, you'll know there's totally a whole load of different imprints. You've got sweet, you've got sexy, you've got medical, historical, paranormal, intrigue. There's a lot. They did used to publish 72 books a month. I think it may have gone down slightly. So I read them really quickly. And it was actually great at the time because I had a young child and was pregnant with another one. I didn't have a lot of time in my life. And these books meant that I could actually finish a book quickly. But I totally changed my mind. I read them and I thought, you know what? These are not what I imagined. Maybe they were once upon a time, heaving bosoms and throbbing manhoods. I don't know. But they were definitely not cliched to me. Some I really loved, some I didn't, just like any books in any genre that we write. So I decided this is something I was definitely going to do. Now, the difference between, so probably by that stage, it was 10, 11 years. No, sorry. Maths is not my strong point. About 8 or 9 years. And since I decided to write a book, and had got nowhere in that time because I was faffing around, not really knowing what I wanted to writing the wrong thing, lots of different reasons. Anyway, but one of the big things, the difference between when I decided to write in 98 to when I decided to write a romance in 2006 was the internet was more of a thing. So you could then Google how to write a romance novel. And suddenly I had all this information, not only articles telling me, how to structure a book and the things that characters should be, all those things I talked about, but I found an organisation called the Romance Writers of Australia. And if anyone is a writer, an aspiring writer, or wants to get published, whether or not you write strong romantic elements or only have a fraction of romance, and let's face it, most stories do have an element of romance, even Harry Potter. I really recommend you join Romance Writers of Australia. That was where things finally started changing for me. I started learning things that I should have learned at university. I started making networks with other writers and publishers, and I started entering in competitions. And in 2008, when I was pregnant with my third child, I came runner-up in a Mills and Boon competition worldwide. And the winner got published. Sadly, not me, but I came runner-up, and I got to work with an editor for a year. It turned into 2 years. After 2 years of writing about 3 or 4 short romances, Mills and Boon length, and working with this editor, the book was sent to acquisitions, which means they were considering buying it. But they said, no, it just didn't quite fit where they wanted it to go, because I was falling between the sexy and the sweet line. Instead of saying try again after 2 years, they said, you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing this, basically. And they said, I lost my contact with the editor and was told if I really must write a book, just send it, you know, to the general submissions line again. So this was by then, I think, 11 years after I had, no, it would have been, sorry, told you my maths is not my strong point, 13 years after I decided to write a book. And I was devastated because I'd wasted, I felt like 13 years trying to write. I'd made the mistake of telling everyone I knew that I wanted to write books. And so they thought I was really, really terrible. And I thought, I have 3 little kids. I never see my husband. I don't watch TV. I should probably just give up. And luckily I had some really good writing friends who I made through Romance Writers Australia. One of them was Catherine Hine, who some of you may have read. Another was Fiona Palmer, also who you may have read. And they said, why are you jumping through all these hoops trying to write for Mills and Boon? Both of them had just been recently published by Penguin in rural romance. They said, you live in a small rural community, write a rural romance. And I felt like a bit of a fraud because I wasn't there as a farmer or a farmer's wife even. But my husband does come from a farming background. That's another story. And by this stage, I'd been there 3 or 4 years in a small town. I'd fallen in love with it. I love everything pretty much about living in small communities. But I decided instead of focusing on the farm, I would write one last book. I thought it's going to be my absolute last ditch attempt. I took the last idea that I was going to write for Mills and Boon, which is about a runaway bride, and I put it in a small country town. And rather than focusing so much on the farm, I focused on the things that I loved that were happening in the community. One of the things at the time was the revival of the Theatrical Society. I had 3 young children. My husband was a volunteer ambulance officer, worked full time as well. I really wanted, my drama is my minor. I really wanted to be involved, but I thought not this year. So I decided to write about it instead. And that book was Jilted. There is a picture here. I didn't get books. But that was my very first book, Jilted. But it wasn't actually the first book I got published. While I was writing Jilted, I'm sure some of you either read on BorrowBox or what's the other library, digital apps. Anyway, many of you probably read on Kindle or Apple or something like that. So at the time when I was finally getting rejected by Mills and Boon and I was writing my last ditch attempt, digital publishing became a thing. It really exploded. And there was a publisher called Carina Press that is actually part of Mills and Boon, Harlequin Mills and Boon. And they sort of said they were looking for stories, not necessarily that specifically fit in the imprints previously, but any great story. And so I thought, you know what? I'm just going to send what I call my Mills and Boon reject. Don't tell my publicist I say that, because she's like, that's not what you can't call that. Anyway, I thought I'm going to send my Mills and Boon reject. I'm going to put back all the things that they told me to took out. So like I had lots of secondary characters. It was a Christmas theme book, and they told me, you know, first book should not really be Christmas, and they didn't want all the secondary characters because that wasn't what Mills and Boon focused on. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to put everything back in and I'm just going to submit it. So I submitted that, kept writing Jilted. And then on April Fool's Day in 2011, I got an email from the publisher of Carina Press saying, hey, we loved your book and we want to buy it. Sorry, I couldn't believe it, that after 15 years, someone finally wanted to buy something. I thought it was, a friend of mine thought it was an April Fool's joke at first, but it wasn't. So I'm glad that was that day. Otherwise I would forget because I have a terrible memory now, but I know my call anniversary. So then, because I got published with Mills and Boon, I got to go to a Harlequin Australia dinner, and my friend, another friend who I won't mention because she was writing for Carina Press erotic fiction, and she doesn't like me to tell her everyone her pseudonym, and she does write rural romance as well. But she was published with another publisher for rural, but she was at this dinner and she was a bit drunk, and she sat next to my publisher and she's like, oh, you should read my friend's rural romance. It's so good. You should publish it. And she was going on and on. She'd only read one chapter, but the publisher said, fine, here's her card. I think she just wanted to shut her up. She said, tell her to send it. So she gave me the card, and I had that goal, which is gold as a writer. And so I did. I sent it. And within a week, she asked for the full manuscript. And within a month, I had my first print contract. So I went 15 years of total drought. And then within 1 year and a couple of months, I was offered a digital contract and a print contract. And the rest, kind of, as they say, is history. After 15 years of not really having much luck at all, there is an element of luck in this business, and I had some luck. I came into rural romance at the time when it was booming. I had a publisher who previously had not published, that only published books from overseas and distributed them, but they were now publishing local talent, and so they were really, pushing my book. And I had some great covers, and covers is hugely important, especially in the first years. We all judge books by covers. And if you don't have great covers in those first couple of years, it can really kill your career. So things went well for me. And the reason I told you why I wrote Rural Romance is because I just love the communities of small towns. You know, we experienced lots of things in our 11 years, because then after Coconut, we moved to Goomalling, which is in the wheat belt, and owned our own small supermarket. So we experienced, you know, lots of highs and lows of the community, good things that happened and not so great things. And so a lot of that goes into my books, has been great for my books. But I wrote these books and everyone liked them, and that was lovely. And then I never planned on changing to a different genre. So I probably should have said earlier. Did I say earlier? I write in rural romance, and I also write, which is self-explanatory. Everyone knows that's romance stories set in the country, right? And then I also write in another genre that's not so self-explanatory. You may have heard terms like women's fiction, chick lit. What does that mean even? And so my books in this genre, I kind of explain as they're all relationship stories, but they're not, the romance isn't the focus. There might not even be a real romance in there. But their focus is more on the other relationships women have, such as relationships with their siblings, parents, grandparents, husbands, friends, strangers. I've done a whole load of different types of relationships, and I am fascinated with human relationships. So that's what those books are about. Anyway, but it wasn't, even though I loved reading those types of books, it wasn't sort of a very strong decision I made. What happens, I was driving through the wheat belt in Western Australia with a friend of mine, and we saw this beautiful paddock of purple flowers. And I was like, oh my goodness, well, that's gorgeous. What is that? And she said, oh, that's a weed. And she told me off about all the things that this weed could do. And then she told me it was called Patterson's Curse. And once she'd calmed down, she said, you know, that's a really good name for a book. And I thought, yeah, it is. But the more I thought about it, it wasn't a rural romance. I thought about a family curse. I knew I wanted 4 sisters trying to disprove a family curse. So I went to my publisher and I said, I'd like to write a different kind of book. And luckily she said yes. And that book was the Patterson Girls, which actually won me Australian Fiction, General Fiction Book of the Year a couple of years, 4 years ago now, I think. So that's sort of when I decided to write in 2 different imprints. I'm not what you call a plotter. I'm sure many of you have listened to writers talk before, and you may have heard there's sort of 2 types of writers. You have at one end of the spectrum, plotters who outline their whole book before they start. They know every scene and chapter kind of thing, what's going to happen really well. They know all the high points and the low points. They know the ending, all that kind of stuff. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are called pantsers. And that is basically short for writes by the seat of their pants. So they sit down and then just start writing a book with no thought previously to what they're going to write. Now, I don't think any professional writer can be completely a pantser or completely a plotter. We're all on the spectrum somewhere. But I'm more of a pantser than a plotter. I don't start with an outline. I do start with a vague idea of what might happen. I start with a premise. So this latest book, for instance, Flying the Nest, I read an article. Articles are always inspiring, just when you're faffing around the internet thinking you should be writing rather than wasting time. You'll see something. And I read an article a few years ago on Twitter, and it was about nest parenting. Something about the headline obviously caught my interest. Now, this latest book is about nest parenting. For those of you who don't know what nest parenting is, because I didn't when I first read the article, and having done a few talks over the last few weeks, I found quite a few people don't know. So I'll just briefly tell you before I talk about how I wrote this book and my process of what it is. I'm just going to take a sip of my drink. I shouldn't be using champagne like water, but I needed something. Anyway, so I read a book. Nest parenting is when 2 people separate or divorce. Traditionally, if there was kids involved, they would end up being ferried back and forth between the parents' new houses. Whether that's 2 weeks with one parent, a weekend with another, or one of each, or whatever. But it's the kids that do the moving back and forth. They might have 2 different bedrooms. They've got to pack their stuff every couple of weeks or whatever. In nest parenting, the kids don't move back and forth. They stay in the family home, and the parents end up coming back and forth. So they might live 1 week with the kids, and then they'll go off somewhere and live by themselves while the other parents live with the kids. And I remember thinking, wow, in theory, this is a really good idea, because, the kids who are already going through the emotional trauma of divorce don't have to be upheavaled in other areas of their life, and they can, stay in their comfort zone kind of thing. I think it's probably a really good thing if you've got quite a lot of money, because one of the scenarios I read about was that there's 3 dwellings involved. So the family home where the kids stay, the mum will have also their own apartment or unit, the dad or mum, whatever, I'm saying dad and mum in this case, but you know what I mean. The parents will have their own separate places as well. But the majority of us could not afford to keep 3 houses or units even going. So a lot of people actually, they share another property, but they never live there together, if that makes sense. Anyway, so I came up with this, I read about this and I thought, this sounds really interesting. I want to write about this. So I had that idea in my head when I started the book. Another thing with this book is I'd gone to a library talk a few years ago way up north of Western Australia in a place called Dampier. Now, everyone knows Red Dog and the story of Red Dog up in the Pilbara, but the librarian at Dampier told me that there was, I'm just checking my time here. How are we going? Yep. Okay. The librarian at Dampier told me that as well as Red Dog's story, there was another story up there that, people didn't really know much about, but was really fascinating. And she pointed off the coast about 800 meters, and there was this island. And she said, it's called Sam's Island. The official name is Tidepole Island. And she said, basically a guy came over, I think it was in the 70s. He ended up sort of becoming a squatter on this island while he worked for various people and things. And then he started building a dwelling on the island, and it ended up looking a bit like a castle. He, built it out of just everything he could find, driftwood and whatever. And people gave him supplies as well. So much so that he became a bit of a local legend. And in the end, BHP gave him a 100-year gentleman's lease and let him live there. So he lived out there until he died with his cat. He wasn't a hermit. Lots of people came to visit, and he said as long as they respect, his space, then he's happy to have visitors. And she said he's such a fascinating guy. This local primary school had written a little picture book about it, and there was a committee trying to keep, because he died, and obviously then it was getting run down. There was a committee, trying to work to preserve it. And I thought, wow, that is a fascinating story. And I would like to base a story on it. I'd never based a story, on fact like that, but Judy Nunn does it all the time. So I thought, maybe this is something I'd like to give it a go. And I thought for some reason, something was telling me, now writing a book is a lot like doing a jigsaw puzzle, I think, because you have seeds, sort of little things floating around, and they keep kind of float around your head until you work out how do they fit together. And something was telling me that I could put nest parenting with this island story. The problem is I'm a writer who likes things to work. I like them to be believable. I've got friends who say, don't worry about it, just write it. And, people will suspend their disbelief. So I wanted my main character, Aisling, who is in a nest parenting situation, or it's thrust upon her at the beginning of the book. I knew that I wanted her to have an obsession with this island and maybe to go there every week when she wasn't with her, the alternate week when she wasn't with her family. But I also wanted her, she's a woman I think a lot of people can relate to. She has devoted the last basically 20 years to her husband and her children. She helped him build up his business. So she hasn't, worked in her own career, which was journalism. She's worked on school committees. She's done lots of things, but, it's been for other people. And so I thought, who's going to give her a job up north so good that they'll fly her in and out 1 week on, 1 week off? I thought it's just not believable. And I also didn't want her to work in the mines. I wanted her to be in the town so she could kind of become obsessed with this island and work out the story. So I thought, no, I can't do it. And I even forgot about the idea for a couple of years, still wanting to write nest parenting, but not sure how. And then an obvious thing dawned on me a few years after, and I thought, Rachel, make up a town, which is what I do in all my rural romances. So I made up a town that was about 2 hours north of Perth, roughly around the Jurien Bay, Cervantes area. And the good thing about making up towns is you can base them on a real place and sort of ground them by referencing other real places, but you can play God. You can put 10 pubs if you want, or 2 fish and chip shops that are rivals. You can do, so there's my timer telling me it's almost time to just be quiet. So yeah, that's what I began with when I decided to write this book. I literally began with the concept that I wanted a woman in a nest parenting relationship. Oh, there was one thing that I thought about. I wanted her to have a difficult moral dilemma. Books are great if there's a moral dilemma. And mine with this one was, what happens when a woman is forced to choose between her own happiness and that of her children? Like, how do you choose? Most people probably would choose our children, but then are children really happy if you're not unhappy? So that's the dilemma I wanted about this book. a woman's choice between her own happiness and her children. So I started with that in my head. I started with her. I had to give her kids. So then I sort of started with them. And I didn't really know whether she was going to save her marriage or where she was not going to. I knew that she was going to have something to do with this island, but I didn't know who else was going to be to do with the island. And basically that's all I knew when I sit down to start writing. But I do have my main character, I did have a very strong idea of who she was, what her backstory was, you know, what her career once was, what she wanted from herself, and what her goal of the book was. Her goal of the book is to get back with her husband and to keep her family together. The interesting thing about goals in fiction is characters don't necessarily have to achieve them. It's the journey you go through to get them. Anyway, I have probably rambled on far too long. I'm amazed still people listening. Have you got any questions? If you don't have any questions, I'll just talk a little bit longer while you're coming up with any. Feel free to ask me anything about writing my process, any particular books you're interested in hearing about, covers. A lot of people ask me about covers and whether or not I have any say in my covers. The answer is yes and no. When I first got published, I had no say at all. My first digital book, One Perfect Night, they sent it to me and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so saucy. How can I show my face around town? It's really, really saucy. And what's my grandmother going to think? But I didn't have any choice. My first real romance, this one, they sent it to me when it was final and I wasn't offered any say about whether or not I could change it. Since then, I've been given a lot more say. I get to give some input before the cover is drafted. I get to say, you know, ideas that I have, but I kind of set back again the last few years because my ideas are never anything like the ones they come up with, and they know what they're doing and I don't when it comes to, you know, drawing and I don't even know what it's called. Design, that's right. So I let them kind of go. But now I do know how important covers are, that if there's something I don't like in a cover, I will say. For instance, sorry, I'm just going to grab one off here. My book, Lost Without You, is about the search for a wedding dress. You can see a little wedding dress right here on the front. When I first got this cover, there was no wedding dress on the cover. It was just 2 vases of flowers. And I thought, oh, that's a really, really pretty cover. But I would look at it in the shop and go, oh, how beautiful. And then I'd go to the book next door that had something on the cover that piqued my interest. So I demanded to have a wedding dress. Now, I've seen the question down there. I don't know whether Tracy wants me to. Oh, I've seen the question, Tracy, so shall I just answer it? Okay. Basically, the question, did it just pop up? The question was, tell you about my honours year. Okay, so yeah, slow learner. I did the honours degree. You had to write a short story. It was not much you had to do. To write a short story in the first semester and like 20,000 words of a novel and a thesis about why you wrote it and the themes and all that kind of stuff in the second semester. So first semester, I wrote this short story. It was terrible because I had learnt nothing. So I hadn't made much progress in 4 years. And my assessor or my tutor, who was, I'm not even going to say the genre because you might be able to find out who it is. He is an author. He was my he marked it and he gave me 3 out of 10. And that's basically, well, that is a fail. So having failed the first unit's big thing, I knew that I had very little chance of, you know, lifting it to get much of a good degree good mark overall. Luckily, somebody else had to mark it because the grade was so low, 3 out of 10. And so they gave me 7 out of 10. So that made it go down to, you know, 5. So I passed just, but I think that kind of really put a damper on my spirit. So the next semester I was not so enthusiastic. So I passed my honours, but not like first class or anything, high distinction or anything like that. The funny story is that a couple of years ago I was at Big Sky Writers Festival in Geraldton, and the person who failed me was there because he lives up there. Now I'm probably telling that he won't care if I told you who it was anyway. And he lives up there, and I went up to him. He didn't remember who I was. I was writing under a different name now. He knew me as my maiden name, but he still probably wouldn't have remembered. And I said, hi, we've met before. And he said, oh, have we? I said, you used to teach me at uni. He's like, oh, fabulous. How was it? Did you enjoy uni? I said, oh, you actually almost failed. Well, because of you, I almost failed my honours. He was like, what? Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Because by this time he knew who I was. And apparently his wife reads my books. And he was terribly embarrassed that he almost failed me, or that he did fail me. And I said, seriously, no hard feelings, because you probably should have. It was probably terrible. But the funny part is he went home to his wife and told her, and she said, oh my goodness, that's terrible. I can't believe you failed Rachael Johns. I think you should ring the uni tomorrow morning and ask if you can have them remark her in retrospect. I said, don't be silly. And I'm sure he couldn't have anyway. So has anyone got any other questions? I'll take a sip of
Rachel.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
People are a bit shy with their questions tonight. I'll ask. So I'd like to know who you're reading at the moment, and what writers have most influenced your own writing, and are you writing anything new?
Yep. Okay. So what I'm reading at the moment, oh my gosh, my mind's gone blank. Oh, that's right. So I mentioned earlier I have an online book club on Facebook. So we've got about 3,500 people. So it's a pretty good community. Anyone's welcome to join if they want. That's a plug. I'm reading The Mystery Woman by Belinda Alexander for that. I haven't read a lot lately because I've been madly editing and writing and promoting this book. One book I really loved recently, though, was Anxious People by Frederick Bachmann. It was just so quirky, great characters, twists and turns, makes you think. Absolutely loved it. And I listened to it with my kids on a long drive. So it's a kind of story. I mean, my youngest is 12, so not really little kids, but it's a kind of story that I think just will entertain anyone. Who do I love? A lot of Australian writers. We're so lucky at the moment, but my go-tos are ones that I just can't always buy. Is a recent find is Simone St. James. She writes like mysteries with a bit of ghost elements in there. And Marianne Keyes, Liane Moriarty. My mind's completely gone blank. It's crazy. But yeah, those types of books. And as for what I'm writing, I've just finished editing a book called How to Mend a Broken Heart, which is coming out in May. It's a semi-sequel to my book, The Art of Keeping Secrets, and it's set in New Orleans, I should say, where I went with a writing friend a couple of years ago, and I've always been fascinated with. So that's a really fun story that I'm looking forward to sharing. And I'm now writing the 5th book in my Bunyip Bay Outback series. It's very early days. I've actually started 3 times. It's not being kind to me. So yeah. And I see Alison's asked another question. Just wondering if we can see your earrings, please. No, I did not mention them earlier. She's asked. I have a bit of an obsession with earrings. So I have to ban myself from Instagram, where I follow all these earring makers. But these ones only just came today. They're different on each side. So you're also getting a big use close-ups of my face. That one and this one. So as a writer who does write romance, when I saw these online last week or so, I had to have them. They're by Ernst Wilder, Australian, but they're Pete Cromer designs by Ernst Wilder. So yeah, I've got so many earrings, and I don't think it's like books. You can never have enough. So anyone else got any other questions? So I'll take another sip. Oh, hang on, there might be another one down there, or is that the one that I didn't dismiss? Answered live. There we go.
So how long did it actually take you to write Fly in the Nest, Rachel?
So it used to be I would take probably about 3 or 4 months to write a book, and erring on the 3-month side. I used to be much faster, I think, because I didn't have lots of readers' comments, reviews, editors' comments in my head. But now everything I write, I've got a million voices telling me we shouldn't do that. Remember, you're not supposed to do that, and just various like doubts. So it takes a little longer. Plus when I started also, social media wasn't a thing, so there's less distractions, and also I didn't have as many books out there, so I wasn't having to do as many events and things like that. So Flying the Nest, I think, actually took a little bit longer. I think more like 5 to 6 months maybe in the actual first draft. Saying that, I'm always, I've done 2 books this year and next year. I hadn't done 2 books for a while, but when I'm doing that, it's even busier. So it's really rare that I get a chance to write a book or first draft completely without an interruption for either promoting a book that's come out or editing the next book. So there's breaks in that time. Yeah.
Awesome. And so do you ever suffer from writer's block? And if so, what do you do about it?
It's a hard one. I'm not actually sure if you call it writer's block. I think writer's block is usually because of two reasons if you're stuck, and that is one, you're either it's doubt and your head's messing with you, and I do suffer with that a lot. And so the voices in my head telling me that I can't do this and everything else was a fluke slows me down, and then I start thinking, oh, the book's terrible, why am I even, and that kind of, you get too much inside your head rather than just writing. One book I had to write really fast because it was a deadline mix-up, Outback Blaze, and I don't think I had the time to get inside my head with that, you know, to kind of doubt as much, and so that was a lot easier to write. So I think it's doubt that stops you writing, not necessarily writer's block. The other reason when you're stuck is because something, you're forcing your characters to do something that they may not actually do. Like they're real people, they should be real people to you, and that means that their motivations, their personality should direct how they what they do and how they act, not what you need them to do for the plot. So often if I'm stuck, it's because I've had an idea in my head what I want them to do and it's just not working, and I've got to, you know, think how to get around that. An example of that is from Something to Talk About, which is my rural this year. When I first started writing the book and I had a vague idea of the characters, I also decided, so in romance is what we call tropes, things like secret baby, fake engagement, I think, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, reunited lover, all that kind of stuff. And I decided that I wanted to do a pretend relationship. But when I got to the point in the book where one of the characters had to ask the other one to embark on a pretend relationship with them, I was like, well, he might ask, but she's not the type of person to accept. And I was like, but no, because that's exactly like, even though I don't plan, I kind of was, you know, that's where the direction I was kind of going. And I had a vague idea that of things that were going to need to happen for that. And I was like, oh, but she wouldn't do it. And so I was stuck for about a week or two, you know, walking up and down, trying to work out what am I going to do, because I've written, you know, 30,000 words heading in this direction and she's not going to do it. So how am I going to, and the tropes in romance are what sort of keeps your characters together, but also provides conflict and things like that. And I thought, well, if I don't have this pretend relationship, how am I going to continue their relationship and continue them getting to know each other? Because I need something else. And then I thought, eventually I was walking around, walking's all good. So when I go for a walk or hang the washing out, have a shower, that's when the best ideas come. And I was on a walk one morning and I suddenly thought, he can still ask her, but she can say no and explain why, her vulnerability kind of thing. And they can have sort of a moment where she says thank you to him kind of, and she kisses him on the cheek, meaning to say thanks, but he turns his head at the last minute by accident and they actually have a kiss. And that kiss is sort of when they go, whoa, we didn't think we even liked each other kind of, and now we sort of do, but now there's spark. And so when I worked out I could use the trope but not continue it, I was okay. So often it's a long-winded answer saying if block is usually because you're forcing the characters to do something else. I do struggle with ideas. That's probably the biggest block I kind of get. Years ago when I first started, it was always I'd get halfway through a book and another brilliant shiny idea would come to me and I just want to write that, which I didn't. I stuck it out. But I always actually felt quite good because I knew that I had the next book kind of in my head, and I felt that gave me sort of, it was like a comfort blanket, you know what I mean? Made me feel like, okay, I know what I'm doing next, so it's fine. Whereas that doesn't happen as much now. And so, yeah, I think the more books you write, the less you kind of draw from your own experience, and sometimes you have to start manufacturing ideas or going looking for ideas a little bit harder than you did in the beginning.
Yeah, fair enough. And so just finally, what advice then would you give to writers who are working towards publication?
Okay, there's a couple. One would be read. Make sure you're reading almost as much as you're writing, if not more, because it's so important to learn. You know, you learn from other people and it's just, yeah, you need that. But do also write, because a lot of people, you know, want to write a book but never actually get around to actually writing it, or they're scared to start because they don't know how. And, you know, none of us really know how when you start. And if you have been a reader, you'll have a way bigger head start than me. And basically your whole life you've been learning how to write a book. So trust that you know from reading and just start. The third one would be to join a Romance Writers Australia or a like-minded, if you're not, you know, there's crime organisations, there's fantasy ones. Join a serious organisation that is very professional in their outlook, and they're serious about it. You know, there's a lot of small little writing organisations around. It's fine if you depends what you want out of your writing. If you want to make a career out of it, make sure you join a professional organisation. If you're happy just to be a hobby, then, you know, local writer centres can be great. So yeah, it depends what you want. Make sure you find like-minded people to help you on your journey. And the biggest one I would say is don't rush, because so many people, like, and I probably would have been the same. So I'm glad there was no self-publishing around when I first started. I hear so many people now. And as I said before, I think self-publishing is a really viable option, depending on your reasons for doing it. And quite a few people write one book, it gets rejected by a couple of publishers, and they think, oh, well, it's not my book, it's the publishers. They obviously don't know what they're talking about. And these days, anyone can publish anything they like. So they go out and publish their book where it might actually not have been ready. Sometimes you have to write a few books before you're ready. I had to write quite a few. And I think it's Anna Jacobs, a Western Australia writer, says, look upon the books you write before publication as your apprenticeship. You know, you can't just decide I'm going to be a brain surgeon tomorrow, I'm going to go to the hospital and operate on people. You have to, you learn your skill, and writing is no different. You have to learn your craft. I guess the only difference is that for some of us, that apprenticeship might take a year or two. Some of us it takes 15 years, some of us even longer. But yeah, don't be in a rush, because sometimes, you know, things happen for a reason. Take the time. Yeah.
That's awesome advice. And just, you mentioned your online book club earlier. So is that on your Facebook page?
Yeah, well, you can find a link on my Facebook page or on my website. Otherwise, you can just go on Facebook and search Rachael Johns Online Book Club, and it comes up. Next year, we're hoping to get maybe on YouTube as well, so you won't have to necessarily be a member of Facebook, but the community is mostly on Facebook. Yeah.
Awesome, great. And just finally, Sherilyn has said, thanks, have loved your chat. Thank you, Rachael. And her granddaughter is presently enjoying the Babysitters Club.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so sad that I had 3 boys who, you know, they're not interested at all in reading the Babysitters Club for some reason. So maybe I have grandchildren one day that I can make read it.
I love that nostalgia hit you gave us earlier, because I remember reading all of those Babysitters Club books too. And those troll dolls that are on your shelf.
Oh. I've got a small collection. I used to have a lot more, but my dog, one of my dogs ate them, which I was very depressed about, because I do love trolls.
They're awesome in those little boxes. Well, thank you so much, Rachael, for joining us this evening, all the way from Western Australia, and sharing your wonderful new book with us. And I hope you'll join us at Marion Libraries again when your next book is finished.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me. I hope everyone enjoyed it and I didn't ramble on too much.
No, it's wonderful. And maybe next time you can come and see us in person when the world returns to some kind of normality.
Sounds good. I'm there.
Rachel's books can be purchased at Shakespeare's Bookshop, our bookseller partner for this webinar, either online at shakespearesbooks.com.au, via phoning the store, or in-store at Blackwood. And of course, our libraries have all of Rachel's books in them too, so you can come and borrow those or reserve them. And please follow the Marion Libraries Facebook page, City of Marion website, and check your inbox to be kept up to date on all of the upcoming Library Through the Lens presentations and workshops. And if you haven't already registered, please join us on Thursday, the 10th of December for Lunchtime Lit, our monthly adult storytelling sessions, when James from Reading Companions Australia will read from the classic A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Hope you'll join us then, and thanks again, Rachael, for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Bye.